So this starts about 4 years ago, and I'm sitting in my office. I worked for Walmart at the time, you know, the big stores. Heard of it? And I'm running private brands. So private brands, just so you have a sense inside Walmart, I mean, Walmart's a big place. And private brands in Walmart are big. So the brands that I was overseeing, the food and consumable brands, things like cereals and graham crackers, represent the second and third largest brands in the world, bigger than Procter & Gamble, bigger than Kraft. And I'm sitting in my office. I've got a half an hour break between a day that is just filled with meetings. In my half an hour break, I'm occupying with catching up on email. And I'm in that role because previous to running private brands, I had started sustainability at Walmart. And one of the things that I'd seen in sustainability was no matter what the company did on fleet and stores and etc., it was all about the items that we sold and the things that we all buy. And so the idea, my passion in private brands was I was going to move from sustainability into these products, the person who writes the check. And we were going to change how these products were conceived, how were they designed, how they were sold. And as we did it, it would ripple. It would ripple to every other product on the shelf, and we would change the industrial model. So that's my mental image of what I'm doing. And so I'm about a year and a half into this. I'm sitting in my office. And at Walmart, doors are always open. It's just part of the culture. So I'm scrambling through my email, and there's a guy standing in my door. His name's Gary Holmes. And Gary's standing at the door. Gary's a veteran of the food industry. He's gray hair, been working in the food sourcing space for at least 35 years. And for some reason, I'm still not to this day sure why, he used to call me boss. And Gary is standing at my door, and I'm working away, trying not to look up because I've got to get through the email. And Gary's sitting there smiling and says, "Hey, boss, do you have a minute?" And of course, I look at his big smile and say, "Come on in, have a seat." So Gary comes in, he sits down, and he's got one of these cores of toilet paper. And he said, "Do you realize that every year in the U.S., there's 17 billion rolls of toilet paper that we go through?" 17 billion. Right, wow. So I'm used to big numbers, and still I said, I didn't know that. It's a big number. 17 billion. And then he tells me that when people in the U.S., 17 billion rolls, and people are done, 85% of people throw them in the trash. Right, even though they're perfectly good recyclable cardboard. So 85%. And he says that waste is 160 million pounds of waste a year, which if you're trying to wrap your minds around 160 million pounds, that's 250 737s. Not the toilet paper, just the core, just in the U.S. And then Gary tells me that he's been working with a supplier, and they figured out a way to eliminate the core of the toilet paper. So now I'm smiling, thinking, this is it. This is one more example of hundreds of why I'm in this role. And it's the power of this human innovation, right? That the second that we start framing these things in terms of what we're doing and how we think about these things and opening our eyes, that it's like the fruit isn't just low-hanging, it's like squashing under our feet. They're everywhere. So I'm excited about this, and Gary's excited about it. And before he left my office, he said, it would mean a lot if we went to the factory, because it wasn't very typical that people from the Walmart home office would show up in a factory. And I said, of course, let's go to the factory. So we agreed to plan the trip, and it's several weeks later. We've taken what I believe was about a 5:30 a.m. flight out, and we're now sitting in Neenah, Wisconsin, at the toilet paper factory. And I've done hundreds of factory visits, and they all have a similar cadence. You spend the first hour to an hour and a half in a conference room that's fairly dimly lit with coffee and some vending machines, and you basically see more PowerPoints than one person should see in an hour. And it's a beautiful beginning. It's well-intentioned. That there's a history of the factory, and it's really people are very proud of the factory and the history. And it turns out this factory was actually the company that invented the roll itself. And so then it starts moving on to the innovation that was behind this coreless toilet paper, and it's really intense. This is the case with all these stories. So the rolls aren't produced in this size. They're actually produced about 6 of these in a larger roll, and you have to cut the rolls. And when you do that without a core, what happens is you squash the roll. And nobody wants to buy a toilet paper that doesn't go on a toilet paper roll. And they figured out a way to not do that. It turns out that when you ship it, the pressure can compress it. And all these challenges. And they're talking about how they figured out how to work through it. So they've got this air pressure that holds it just so, and it wraps it at a certain speed, and they're able to do this thing without a core. And I'm sitting in the room, and I have the moment that I've had at least a dozen times in this private brand role where I say, gosh, this is so inspiring. It's just an army of people and the human potential of innovation, how to change the model. So I'm pretty pumped. And then it's time for the factory tour. So we walk out of this conference room, and we've got when you walk out on the factory, you've got to make sure no ties, no jewelry. You put on safety goggles, earplugs, and you walk out, and it's a deafening sound if you've been in factories. This is the 20th century industrial model. 6 large factory lines, right, that are massive in size. Dozens of, 4 stories tall in terms of the building, and just massive amounts of toilet paper coming off these lines. And it's being dumped into boxes, neatly in packages, and then being carted off in forklifts over to the storage area. And I'm sitting there, and I'm watching what I feel like is a large percentage of the 17 billion rolls coming off these machines. And I'm looking at the warehouse that has boxes 4 stories tall, full of toilet paper, and trucks that are pulling up, taking it away. And it's the moment standing, looking at the factory lines, looking at the toilet paper, that it hits me that we're not going to solve it this way. The math is not going to add up. We are not going to save our way to a more sustainable future as we consume 17 billion rolls of toilet paper, as Japan, as parts of Europe consume that much toilet paper, as the rest of the world emulates this, right, and reaches for the same amount of consumption per capita that we have. There is no amount of saving material in jackets and less glue in tennis shoes that's going to add up to the future that we need. It's not that it's not good. It's great. And there are thousands of examples of things we haven't touched on yet that can be done. But it doesn't get us there. And that was what struck me that moment. And then from then on, as I'm in private brands, every time I saw an innovation, right, a shoe that was able to be put together without any adhesives, and we're touting it, and we're patting ourselves on the back. And I'm looking at the shoe, and I'm thinking on one side, it's really good innovation. And it's better if we're going to have a shoe that it shouldn't have adhesives, and they shouldn't be toxic. On the other side, I know that all the shoes in the world without adhesives, produced 1,000 times as much, doesn't get us there. And so I started searching for what else is out there that doesn't start with the current 20th century industrial model. Because the answer, while there are a lot of good opportunities, the answer is not in there, right? The answer is outside of that framework. And so about 1.5 years ago, I left Walmart to start a company called Yerdle. And Yerdle's aim is to basically it's to make better use of the things we've already made. So I was just sitting next to Pamela, who got an answering machine on Yerdle, right? The idea is that that answering machine didn't have to be made, because when you think about all of our closets and garages as a connected warehouse, way bigger than Walmart and Amazon, and it's local, and the amount of things we have, 80% of the items in our homes are used less than once a month. The opportunity is massive. And so since that point, standing in that factory, I've been on a very different journey. A journey that starts with thousands, tens of thousands, millions of items moving person to person, right? Not just making things less bad or better, making better use of the things that we already have. And where it goes long term, no one knows. But the idea is when thousands and millions of items are moving laterally, items start getting designed differently. And we end up with a system that positively can't be designed from inside a factory today. It must be designed from a different paradigm. And both are good and both are needed. And I celebrate every exciting innovation about removing plastic from a fork or making a jacket more recyclable. But now I also celebrate the innovation that happens outside of that and where we're going, which is making better use of answering machines and tennis shoes and jackets and shin guards that are right next door in our garages. Thank you.